What do you think of the term politically correct?
Well, as you know, in my book, I talk about it extensively, and I share with people where it actually comes from, because most of the people who are politically correct have absolutely no idea where the term comes from, what the origins of it are, what the origins of the concept are. And of course, most people, in my experience in the United States, in the UK, in the entirety of the West, don't understand that in accepting political correctness, they've actually imbibed the dogma of the early, not even the late, but the early Communist Party in Soviet Russia, because this is something that was used essentially, and political correctness, people should know this, never had anything to do with preventing offense, with being kind, with being generous, with being respectful towards minorities. Political correctness never had anything to do with any of that. The point of political correctness was that so the people in the Soviet Union could say, well, comrade, what you're saying is factually correct, but it's politically incorrect. In other words, it was a way of ensuring that the party line could not be challenged. And so when we talk about political correctness in modern Western society, increasingly, to me, what I see is that is the way that the speech codes and the intolerance of different opinions and expression of different views is being used in that way. It is being used to say, well, look, we don't care if what you're saying is factually true. We just care that some people don't like you saying it, and therefore you shouldn't be allowed to say it. And the point I make in my book, and the point I've always made, is look, you can structure your society any which way you want, but this is something that in democratic countries like ours pretend to be, is supposed to be determined by the votes of the people. I don't know many people who voted to have speech codes in American society. It seems to me counterintuitive to the entirety of the American project, which is based, if you think about it, the reason the First Amendment is the First Amendment, it is primary, and it's important to the maintenance of American democracy. That is, political speech should be free insofar as it's possible. Otherwise, you can't really have democracy. And so a lot of the conversations that we have around that issue seem to me to be missing the point, which is that we've bought into an ideology that is completely alien to the Western way of doing business, and to the way that we've structured our societies. And we've done so by incorporating the attitudes and the values of a completely different society with a different culture and a different history, which is Soviet Russia and later Maoist China. These do not seem to me to be the types of societies that we in the West should emulate.
Hmm. Yeah, and in the book too, you mentioned that this sort of control of language, it can even at first look like it's something to help people, but in the end kind of come off as more predatory almost.
Well, right. I mean, this is how the entirety of this restriction of people's speech has been used. It's a way of saying to people that we're going to look after minorities, we're going to look after this group, we're going to look after that group. But as you see the practical consequences of it down the line, you recognize, I think, inevitably that quite often the things that we're not supposed to talk about are the very things that need to be talked about in order that they can be properly ventilated, challenged, questioned, that the right questions get asked. Because what happens if they don't is, take the issue of the transitioning of children, for example, even adults. We just interviewed yet another person who is detransitioning because of what they were rushed into. Well, part of the reason that that was able to occur is that there were certain dogmas that could not be questioned without you immediately becoming transphobic, being banned off Twitter, being banned off social media platforms, etc. And therefore, there was not enough pushback against some of the things that were happening. And that is because there are some people in our society who deliberately conflate a quite legitimate questioning or skepticism about certain progressive dogmas and viewpoints with prejudice and bigotry and whatever, because it's an easy way to dismiss the very important arguments that are being made by the people who disagree with you. And so that's one of the ways. The other way, of course, as I talk about in the book, is if you change the meanings of words, you can change what laws mean. Because if you have a law that says that people must be free from violence, people must be protected from violence, well, that is a law that in the conventional sense means that you are supposed to ensure that people are free from physical harm. that's what violence means, physical harm from another person. But if you change the meaning of violence to someone saying something you don't like, well, a law that was implemented and designed to protect you from being physically attacked can now be used to enforce speech codes on people who say things that you don't personally like. And so simply by changing the meanings of words that already existed, you can change the meaning of legislation without, again, coming back to my point about democracy, without ever having to have an election to determine that this is what you want to happen. And so it's a way of changing the rules by which we play the game without ever consulting the referee.
Yeah, there's so much power in language, and I was kind of meditating on this with a friend as I was preparing for this interview and talking about that political correctness and the predatory side of it, and I didn't quite understand that. And then he told me a story from his own experience that kind of made it click for me. He was 17, and so he's a kid, but he's in this place where he's working as an usher. So he kind of has a little bit of power to let people go at this sporting event, and people are coming and going. And at one point, people run across the space when he's supposed to tell them to stop, and they're not listening. And a woman near him, an older woman, says to him, "Oh, they're so retarded." And in that moment, she was trying to kind of support him and say, "They're not listening to you." But he saw this as a chance to put that woman in her place and say, "Oh, I don't use words like that." And he actually ended up taking her down a peg and kind of using his power. And he said at the moment, as a 17-year-old boy, that was really intoxicating. And then afterwards, he realized, wait a minute, that was me just being a jerk and taking that woman down. But there's this excitement about the power of language that's really hard to let go of.
Mm. That's a really interesting story. And I think power is exactly the right word to talk about, because power and status is something that all people crave, men more than women, but particularly men, and everybody really wants to have influence and power. And power and influence and status are intoxicating. And this is one of the reasons that these ideologies have taken such a strong root, because it's an opportunity for people who otherwise have no power whatsoever, because they haven't built anything, they haven't created anything, they're not people who've started a company that's become successful, or made a scientific discovery, or created some kind of new form of technology, or people who've led a social movement, or people who've achieved anything in any meaningful way that other people around them would recognize and go, "Oh, you've done all these things that benefit us as a human society. We therefore confer upon you an amount of status and an amount of wealth that corresponds to your level of contribution," because that's how the market works, right? Mostly, if you create something that other people value, whether that's a podcast like yours or a book or whatever, people are either going to buy it or not based on whether they think that you've created something of value for them. But what do you do if you don't want to do any of those things? If you sit on the sofa at home, spend 23 hours a day on your computer, well, one of the great things you can do is criticize other people for saying the wrong thing, and you now have power. You can end careers. I mean, it is genuine influence and power that you can get by short-circuiting the system. Where in the past you would have had to work, you would have had to prove yourself, you would have had to create things, you would have had to sacrifice and go through challenges and difficulties. All you have to do now is, tweet, "This guy's a transphobe," or whatever, and suddenly you've got loads of power. Or this woman, as in this case of your friend, no, she said the wrong word that up until 30 years ago everybody knew meant someone, used to mean somebody's not being clever, someone's doing something stupid, as we all do from time to time, right? Now that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for your friend to assert himself, to be morally an upstanding citizen, as if him doing that is going to save one mentally disabled person from discrimination or some kind of mistreatment.
Yeah. Thanks for watching that video. To see the full episode, check out the box over here or the link in the description.